In 2012, George Lucas sold the rights to Star Wars to Disney, and it all went to hell from there, with the sequel trilogy destroying the harmony that existed in the franchise before it. Okay, that's the narrative the internet tends to sell you, but in reality, when George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, he was pretty much fed up with a lot of the franchise at that point, even going so far as to say, why would I make more, in reference to movies, when everybody yells at you all the time and says what a terrible person you are? There's such a baffling idea that implies that the prequel trilogy was warmly received. Um, in reality, it was met with lambast when it first premiered. Granted, I was a child when Revenge of the Sith came out, but I still remember my parents disliking the prequel trilogy, saying it was too political and too childish at the same time. But for many people my age, the prequel trilogy was Star Wars for them, and those people have grown up now. As far as mainstream media is also concerned, mainstream media being movies and television, for people like me, the prequel trilogy was Star Wars. They got the biggest push, with the Clone Wars TV series being what earned a lot of older fans' goodwill and defined what it meant to be a Star Wars story. But as for the topic of this video, let's talk about it. Whenever Disney decides to do something incredibly boneheaded with Star Wars, not planning out their freaking trilogy for starters, we'll get some kind of fan go on about how Disney is desecrating George Lucas's precious vision. This has never been about George Lucas's vision. It has always been about the idea of using George's vision as a scepter of authority, a bit of divine right of kings or mandate of heaven, mind you. George Lucas isn't a god. His vision has always been inconsistent. We have adaptations of George's earlier drafts for starters, which were quite different from what we eventually got. There are also other issues in the room. There are times where George's vision just depended on whether or not he thought something was simply cool. Sam Witwer, who voiced a handful of characters like Maul, Sidious, seriously, the Sun, and Starkiller, did go on record and say Starkiller's Sith name was going to be Darth Icky as a joke. Well, he says George framed it as a joke or somewhat of a sarcastic quip. Other sources say that Darth Insanius was going to be Starkiller's Sith name. There's also how Barriss Offee's depiction in the Clone Wars TV series contradicted Legends at the time. In Legends, she basically would die on Felucia with her master and Luminara Unduli not too far away. People sort of like to believe that George had this solid vision of what is canon and what should happen, when in reality, George's canon was something he was subject to overriding at any given time, even in works he approved of directly. So, this is a strange paradox to have. How do you reconcile the idea of defending George's vision when George's vision constantly shifted? Then there's the other weird paradox with it. George Lucas did sell this franchise to Mickey Mouse after all. I honestly don't believe George Lucas's vision matters much when talking about Star Wars, except in the works that were already made and possibly some notes he had that were pretty recent. Because, frankly, the vision doesn't really exist. What people refer to as George Lucas's vision is their vision of what George Lucas's vision would look like. And if you think this behavior is limited to the Star Wars fandom, it really is. The Pokemon anime, or the Ash anime, I guess, because Ash is no longer a protagonist, had an entire stint in the 2010s where an Italian fanfic writer created a wiki, and it was basically treated as the gospel for which series was truly canon. And then you read the actual justifications on why Black and White, Sun and Moon, and Journeys were not canon at all, and then you can just see and just wonder why this is the case. And then you realize this is an author trying desperately to decanonize series they didn't like. I remember one specific argument being that X and Y actually followed Diamond and Pearl, and Black and White was just an alternate universe because of camera movements, and no one actually explained where the planes came from. Makes about as much sense to me, that's for sure. Then there's the whole original creator trumps all vision that annoys me. You see, George is still alive and gave up creative control of Star Wars. For other works, such as Marvel Comics, their original creators are quite dead. And DC Comics as well, but I'm going to focus on Marvel, mainly Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Lee and Kirby may have created the X-Men, but their iconic stories aren't from the Lee and Kirby era. Dark Phoenix, Days of Future Past, Age of Apocalypse, The Krakoan Age, all of these stories happened under the pens of different writers with different visions for what the X-Men should be. I don't exactly think anyone is arguing that Dark Phoenix isn't an iconic storyline because Stan Lee and Jack Kirby didn't write it, nor are they going to argue any other storyline isn't iconic or influential, some more than others. Even without a change in author and just time in general, a single person's vision does change. The original trilogy it wasn't completely apolitical, it is a war after all. But did anyone really expect a whole message about how democracies end up rotting from the inside out due to inefficient bickering and people just signing away their power and rights until democracy dies with thunderous applause? I don't think so if you were watching Star Wars during the 80s. I truly think that is probably the greatest irony of the sequel trilogy and what ultimately held it back. It wanted to emulate not the prequels, but the original trilogy so much, including the de-emphasis on politics. But the politics of the prequel trilogy shaped the minds of many Star Wars fans growing up in that era. So this shift back, you really can't capture lightning in a bottle. So you're sort of just trying to appease two masses with very contradictory visions of Star Wars, and you're ultimately ending up satisfying no one. That's probably why the whole issue of, oh, Star Wars is too political now came up, because really, if you watch the sequel trilogy, it is a blank slate. You really don't know much. You just have Rebels and Empire under different banners, except the Rebels have no concept of scale, and neither does the Empire here. And you're just left wondering how everything relates together. So, if there's any takeaway from this video, it's that I really don't believe George had a cohesive vision for Star Wars. It was just, okay, this looked cool and this is the story I wanted to tell. And then other authors came in and had the stories they wanted to tell. And they're not lesser authors because they're not George, and their work isn't good because it conformed to George's vision, and it isn't bad because it didn't conform to George's vision. It's bad because of the stories they told, or good because of the stories they told. And generally, Lucas's vision has changed over time because that's what people do. Their perspectives are changed with age and society and just the conditions they deal with. That's not a flaw, that's just how life is. This franchise is decades old. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.